Hello everyone and welcome back to another top 5. So for today's video we are going to be talking about 5 inside jobs that governments blamed on enemies. In a false flag operation, the government or another group stages an event to look like it was carried out by someone besides the real perpetrators. The deceivers use this tactic to discredit another group and start wars, enact severe laws, overthrow political opponents, gain allies, or otherwise get an advantage. As we will see, those carrying out the acts are all too willing to sacrifice lives or promote fear and violence to solidify their ruses. Some of these events are proven to be false flags, while others are simply suspected. For number 5, we have the sinking of the USS Maine. In 1898, Cuba was embroiled in its war for independence from Spain, and the U.S. sent its Navy ship USS Maine down to Havana to protect supposed U.S. interests. Three weeks after arriving, the Maine exploded, killing 260 men. Although there was no proof, sensationalist headlines convinced Americans that Spain was responsible, and the people demanded war, with their rallying cry, "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain." Thus began the short-lived Spanish-American War. In a little over 3 months, the war was finished. The U.S., being the victor, seized many of Spain's colonies, including Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. All in all, things worked out pretty well for the Americans, and Secretary of State John Hay even referred to it as a splendid little war. Still, not everyone agrees that things happened as straightforwardly or as splendidly as they appeared. Some say that the U.S. was actually responsible for destroying the USS Maine as a ploy to incite war, oust Spain from Cuba, and take control of Spanish holdings. U.S. officials have never admitted to this, but Cuba is convinced that the sinking was a false flag event. A USS Maine monument in Cuba even describes the ship's sailors as victims sacrificed to the imperialist greed in its fever to seize control of Cuba. Of course, the monument could simply be an example of a Cold War propaganda, so we can't exactly take Cuba's word for it, and all other investigations into the Maine have come up inconclusive. Number 4. Operation Himmler. By 1939, Hitler was chomping at the bit for war and had systematically subjected the German people to anti-Polish propaganda. Still, he needed one great event to solidify the Germans against Poland, creating a pretext for attack, and so he enacted Operation Himmler, which had the goal of making the Polish look like the aggressors against Germany. The plan was carried out at nightfall on August 31st and is considered the first real act of World War II. It involved dressing SS and SD, Nazi paramilitary and intelligence, men in Polish army uniforms, and having them storm Germany border towns. The disguised SS troops entered the towns while firing shots, vandalizing buildings, and generally wreaking havoc among their own people. In the city of Gliwice, they hijacked a radio station and repeatedly shouted in Polish, "People of Poland, the time has come for war between Poland and Germany." To make things more convincing, the Nazis shot and killed concentration camp victims and Polish sympathizers, referring to them as canned goods throughout the operation. Dressed them in Polish uniforms and left them at the scenes of the skirmishes. The press photographed them and showed the world that the Poles were the invaders. Having set the stage to justify war, Germany attacked Poland the following day and World War II officially began. Operation Himmler was proven a false flag maneuver during the Nuremberg trials. Number 3. The Soviet Union bombed Russia. After seeing the success of Operation Himmler, the USSR took a page out of Hitler's playbook and staged its own casus belli for going to war with a neighboring country. Similar to how the Germans assaulted themselves and blamed it on Poland, on November 26, 1939, the Soviets shelled the Russians' village of Manila and claimed that Finland was the perpetrator. Finland denied responsibility, arguing that their artillery was out of range to even reach Manila. They suggested a neutral investigation to settle the matter, but the Soviets had no interest in negotiations and swiftly renounced the Soviet-Finland Non-Aggression Pact. 4 days later, they invaded Finland, and the deadly Winter War began. Prior to the war, Stalin had tried to reach a deal with the Finns where the USSR would annex part of their country to protect the nearby Soviet city of Leningrad. The USSR was worried about a German attack through Finland and wanted to gain an offensive foothold in the region. Apparently, when the Finnish turned down the proposition, the Soviets figured they would just take what they wanted. The shelling of Manila killed 4 Russian soldiers and wounded 9 others. However, concerning the Stalin's Great Purge, where he killed up to 1 million of his own people, it should come as no surprise that the leader was willing to sacrifice a few innocents for a cause. Still, the shelling led to many more deaths, as there were around 125,000 Soviet casualties and 25,000 Finnish losses in the Winter War. Today, there's no real question that the USSR raided itself and accused the Finns. The fact has been documented by many historians, and Nikita Khrushchev admitted that the Winter War was an act of Soviet aggression. Number 2. Macedonian police frame terrorists. Since becoming independent from Yugoslavia in 1991, Macedonians have eagerly tried to gain favor with Western allies. They joined the war on terror, have been an ally to the US, and even sent troops into Iraq. However, in 2002, in a disturbing act of overzealousness to impress a group of Macedonian police officers intentionally gunned down 7 illegal immigrants, calling them Pakistani militants intent on attacking foreign embassies. The men were not terrorists. They'd been lured into Macedonia by the police with the promise they would be given safe passage to Western Europe. Instead, they were shot in cold blood, their bodies left lying because of machine guns to make it seem like they'd been firing at the police. People were immediately suspicious that the gunfight was staged. For instance, no one could explain why all 7 of the heavily armed supposed terrorists died, but the police were injury-free. Also, the police officers' stories were inconsistent and changed during interrogations. In the end, Macedonian officials admitted that the truth: the immigrants had been murdered to impress the international community. 5 police officers, a businessman, and an interior minister, Ljub Boskovsky, were charged with crime. Number 1. FBI creates fake terrorist plots. Macedonians aren't the only ones deceptively trying to make it look as though they're twatting terror attacks. America's FBI has staged quite a few similar events, only their plans are a bit more sophisticated and typically don't involve direct bloodshed. They do, however, involve a combination of false flag strategies along with what seems to be entrapment. The FBI has repeatedly encouraged and sometimes paid Muslims to commit terror attacks. Right before the would-be terrorists can carry out the assault, the FBI swoops in and claims to save the day. The FBI never informs the public that it concocted the plan. It simply takes credit for keeping the public safe. This effectively raises a false flag on the American people and keeps the citizens fearful of terror groups, while erroneously reinforcing the notion that the FBI is capturing terrorists. In one case, the FBI provided an Oregon college student with a van loaded with fake but realistic-looking explosives. They drove the student to a crowded public event, encouraged him to set off the dummy bomb, and then arrest him after he tried to trigger the detonation code. In the similar setups, the FBI had orchestrated and then thwarted terrorist plans to shoot down aircraft, take explosions on planes, and become suicide bombers. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder says these FBI operations are not entrapment and are essential in fighting terrorism. On the other hand, Human Rights Watch argues that the FBI targets those with mental problems, of low intelligence, or who are otherwise vulnerable. The FBI is creating terrorists out of people who wouldn't have committed a crime without the FBI's encouragement. But that's all for today's video, guys. If you enjoy, please do rate, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video, Saturday, 10 a.m.
Get it until the sunrise. Going 90 in a 65. Windows roll down, screaming now.